Versailles, France. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, December 19, 1944. A Wednesday morning, just past 10 o'clock. The conference room inside the Trianon Palace Hotel smells of cigarette smoke, cold coffee, and the specific kind of tension that fills a room when men in positions of great authority are confronted with a situation they do not fully control. Maps cover every flat surface. Meteorological reports pile beside intelligence summaries. Staff officers move quietly along the walls, carrying papers with the practiced silence of people who understand that the conversations happening today will determine how many human beings are alive in 3 weeks. 4 days ago, on December 16th, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Autumn Mist, the most concentrated German offensive since the early years of the war. 25 divisions, including 10 armored, have torn through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg. 3 American divisions were struck before dawn. Communication lines collapsed within hours. By December 19th, the town of Bastogne, a critical road junction in southern Belgium, is surrounded and besieged. If Bastogne falls, the Germans have a clear path toward Antwerp, potentially splitting the Allied forces in two. The winter offensive that nobody in Allied command believed the Germans still had the capacity to execute has arrived, and it has arrived with catastrophic precision. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, sits at the head of the table. Beside him are his senior commanders and their staffs. Omar Bradley, soft-spoken and systematic. Bernard Montgomery, the British Field Marshal who carries his reputation like a uniform he never removes. An assembly of military authority that represents the combined weight of the Western Allied war effort. They are gathered to answer a single question that carries the weight of everything. Who relieves Bastogne? Who turns fast enough? Who has the forces positioned correctly and, more critically, who has the command capability to execute a counterattack against an enemy winter offensive in conditions this severe? The name that keeps appearing in the operational analysis is the one name that produces the most complicated reactions in this particular room. George S. Patton, Jr., Commanding General, United States Third Army. Before Eisenhower can fully frame the problem, Patton speaks. He has been sitting at the far end of the table in his characteristic way, leaning slightly back, pearl-handled revolvers visible at his hips, even in a conference room, his expression carrying the look of a man who arrived having already solved the problem and is now patiently waiting for the room to agree. "Give me the order," Patton says, his voice carrying the flat directness of someone who has never found diplomacy particularly efficient. "I can have 3 divisions moving toward Bastogne within 48 hours. The room responds, not with silence, with laughter, not from Eisenhower himself, whose expression remains carefully neutral, but from around the table. A British staff officer shakes his head with the tolerant amusement of someone listening to a child claim he can fly. A senior American general to Bradley's left mutters something just below the level of audibility, and the 2 men beside him produce the restrained smiles of people sharing a private understanding about a known quantity. Even among Patton's own countrymen, the reaction is one of familiar skepticism, the kind that builds up over years of watching a man claim the impossible, and then sometimes delivering it, and sometimes creating a catastrophe that someone else has to clean up. 48 hours, moving 3 divisions, in winter, through roads buried under ice and snow, executing a 90-degree pivot, turning an entire army that is currently fighting in one direction around to face a completely different axis of attack. In 48 hours. The logistics alone would require a week of planning under ideal conditions. The weather is the opposite of ideal. The roads are treacherous. The Germans are moving with momentum, and Patton believes he can do it in 2 days. The British general who speaks for the contingent of European commanders is measured and deliberate. He has spent 3 years studying German military doctrine, has coordinated the most complex multinational military operations in the history of warfare, and carries the kind of institutional credibility that comes from being right, in aggregate, more often than he has been wrong. He speaks calmly, without contempt. But what he says contains contempt in its structure, even without the tone. General Patton's optimism is noted, he says, looking at Eisenhower rather than at Patton directly. However, a 90-degree reorientation of an army group in 48 hours is not militarily realistic given current road and weather conditions. We would be well served to plan around what is achievable rather than what sounds impressive in a briefing room. The phrase "sounds impressive in a briefing room" lands in the space between the men like something physical. Several heads nod. An aide writes something in a notepad. The collective judgment of the room has been stated by someone with the authority to state it. Patton, the showman, the self-promoter, the general who once slapped a hospitalized soldier and nearly ended his own career, the man who operates more like an actor playing a general than an actual one. This is what the smiles mean. This is what the shaking heads communicate. The room believes it understands George Patton completely. They have categorized him. They know what he is. Patton sits at the far end of the table and listens to all of it with an expression that reveals almost nothing. He does not argue. He does not perform the theatrical outrage that the room might have expected from him. He looks at the maps on the table in front of him. The same maps everyone in the room is looking at. But he is seeing something different in them. Not theory, not contingency planning. He is seeing the road he is already driving down in his mind. The one he has been driving down since the phone call that told him the Germans had attacked, before this meeting was even scheduled. He had anticipated this. Not this specific offensive on this specific date, but the need. The moment when the war would require someone to do something that careful planning committees would declare impossible. He knew it was coming the way certain people know things are coming, not from prophecy, but from the specific combination of exhaustive preparation and the willingness to see a situation without the protective layer of institutional caution. While the other commanders in the Trianon Palace were reading intelligence reports about the German positions in the Ardennes, Patton's staff had already been secretly ordered 3 days earlier, before the Bastogne crisis became critical, to begin preliminary planning for a potential southward pivot. Not because Patton had perfect intelligence, because Patton understood the shape of possibilities in a way that translated directly into operational preparation rather than strategic discussion. He had 3 contingency plans already drafted, not rough sketches, detailed operational orders with unit assignments, supply routes, fuel calculations, bridge priorities, artillery positioning, communications protocols. 3 complete plans. Because Patton believed that a commander who waits until a crisis exists to begin thinking about solutions has already lost the initiative. Eisenhower looks at Patton after the British general finishes speaking. There is something different in Eisenhower's expression than in the rest of the room. Not belief, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific attention of a man who has watched Patton enough times to know that the laughter in the room may be based on accurate observations about Patton's personality, while being catastrophically wrong about Patton's capability. "George," Eisenhower says quietly, his voice cutting across the residual noise of the room's skepticism. "You are telling me you can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. Not plan, attack." "Not 3 days," Patton says. 48 hours. And if you give me the order in the next 2 hours, I can do it in 46. The laughter returns. Shorter this time. Uncertain. Eisenhower looks at him for a long moment. Then he nods once. "You have the order, George. Move." Patton stands before the sound of the nod has finished. He is already calculating as he exits. Not thinking about the skeptics. Not composing a response to the British general's dismissal. Moving. Because for Patton, the only reply to doubt that has ever meant anything is the kind written in results on the ground, with soldiers and armor and artillery placed exactly where they need to be, at exactly the moment they need to be there. What happens over the following 48 hours is one of the most extraordinary operational military achievements in the entire history of the Second World War. Patton picks up the telephone in his headquarters that evening and issues a sequence of orders that have the specific, compressed authority of a man delivering something already fully formed, rather than something being invented in real time. The orders go to Major General John Milliken of the 3rd Corps, the 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, the 80th Infantry Division, 3 divisions that are currently deployed, equipped, supplied, and fighting in the opposite direction, south and east, toward the Saar region. 3 divisions that must be told to stop what they are doing, reorganize, reorient their supply lines, receive new maps, new objectives, new radio frequencies, new artillery coordinates, and begin moving north toward Bastogne, through roads that are sheets of ice under 6 inches of snow in temperatures below 0 Fahrenheit. Military logistics professionals will later calculate that the pivot Patton executed in those 48 hours would normally require between 7 and 10 days of careful preparation. The road conditions alone, under normal military planning doctrine, would have justified delaying the operation by 4 days minimum. The fuel supply chain for 3 armored and mechanized divisions moving 100 miles in an entirely new direction required a complete reorganization of the Third Army's support infrastructure in real time, while those same divisions were still in contact with the enemy on their previous axis. None of it stops the movement. Because Patton had already started. His staff received the preliminary orders 3 days before the crisis. The fuel calculations existed already. The alternate supply routes were mapped. The bridge classifications on the roads north had been surveyed by Third Army engineers earlier that week. The contingency Patton had prepared for, the one his peers laughed at in conference rooms, was not a fantasy. It was a filed plan with a unit designation and a timeline attached to it, sitting in a folder in Patton's headquarters, waiting for the moment the world needed it. By the evening of December 21st, Third Army units are already moving. Not organizing to move, moving. The 4th Armored Division leads the column north through roads that experienced tank drivers navigate by feel as much as by sight, the darkness and snow reducing visibility to almost nothing. The soldiers do not know the full scope of what they are part of. They know they are cold, and they are driving, and they have orders to reach Bastogne. They trust the direction because Third Army has given them reasons to trust the direction before. In Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division is surrounded, outnumbered, running low on ammunition, cold in a way that penetrates down to bone. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe has famously responded to a German surrender demand with a single word that will be quoted for the remainder of the century: nuts. He means it. But the position is desperate. They are holding the perimeter through discipline and the bitter cold understanding that if they stop holding it, the perimeter does not exist. Every hour matters. Every hour that a relief column does not arrive is an hour the Germans use to tighten the cordon. On December 26th, at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, elements of the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command R, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams, breached the German ring south of Bastogne. Contact is established with the 101st Airborne. The siege is broken. The arithmetic of what Patton has accomplished is staggering when laid against what the conference room in Versailles declared impossible. He pivoted 3 divisions. He moved 100 miles on winter roads. He reorganized an entire army supply chain in real time. He broke the siege of Bastogne in 7 days from the moment the order was given. 7 days that the room of experienced military professionals said could not be done in anything less than 3 weeks under the best conditions. When the reports reach the Allied commanders, the room that laughed does not assemble to discuss the laughter. That is not how these things work in these rooms. The success is absorbed into the overall narrative of the campaign. Operational adjustments are noted. The Battle of the Bulge continues for another weeks, requiring continued effort from multiple Allied formations. Patton's achievement becomes one component of a larger story, which is the appropriate military contextualization of it. But those who were in the Trianon Palace on December 19th carry the memory of the laughter privately. The British general who spoke of things that sound impressive in a briefing room does not repeat that specific phrase in any subsequent meeting. He is too intelligent a man to repeat a sentence that the subsequent 7 days have rewritten so completely. Patton does not reference the conference room in his communications or in his diary with any apparent satisfaction at the vindication. He is already looking at the next problem, the next river crossing, the next enemy positions, the next phase of a campaign that he intends to drive toward Berlin with the same velocity he drove toward Bastogne. He does not have time for the luxury of "I told you so." He barely has time for sleep. His personal diary during this period contains entries written in the specific abbreviated language of a man who understands that history is happening and wants to record it accurately rather than dramatically. Under December 26th, he writes a brief notation of the relief of Bastogne and immediately moves to tactical notes about the next phase of operations. There is no visible emotion in the record, no triumph, just the workmanlike acknowledgement of a task completed and the immediate orientation toward the next one. This is the thing about Patton that the conference room in Versailles never fully understood, and perhaps could not have understood from the outside. The flamboyance, the revolvers, the theatrical speeches to troops, the ivory-handled pistols and polished helmet, all of it was real. He genuinely believed in the theater of command, in the necessity of a visible, dramatic, confident presence for the psychological benefit of the soldiers under his command. But beneath the theater was something that was not theatrical at all. A mind that worked on military problems with the obsessive, disciplined precision of a craftsman who has spent 40 years mastering a single craft. He read military history the way other men read scripture, not for inspiration but for data, for pattern recognition, for the accumulated tactical intelligence of every campaign fought since the Punic Wars. When he told the conference room he could move in 48 hours, he was not performing confidence. He was reporting a fact that he had already verified through 3 days of preliminary work that nobody in the room knew existed. He was not improvising. He was announcing the deployment of preparation that had already been completed. The men who laughed saw a general who claimed the impossible. They thought they were watching ego. They were watching the results of work done in advance by someone who understood that a commander's most valuable preparation happens in the quiet days before a crisis appears. In the contingency folders that gather dust until the hour they are suddenly the only thing standing between an army and catastrophe. Decades later, the relief of Bastogne is studied at military academies around the world as one of the premier examples of rapid operational maneuver in modern warfare. The pivot of Third Army in December 1944 becomes a case study taught to officers who were not born when it happened, analyzed for the principles of preparation, flexibility, and command decisiveness that it demonstrates. The laughter from the Trianon Palace conference room is not in the textbooks. It does not need to be. The response to it is in the textbooks. The response crossed 100 miles of frozen Belgian roads in 48 hours and arrived in Bastogne before anyone who doubted it was possible had finished composing their analysis of why it could not be done. Patton understood something that the room did not, that the distance between the impossible and the achievable is almost never a matter of objective physical reality. It is almost always a matter of whether the right preparation met the right moment. The room had no way of knowing about the preparation. They saw only the moment, and they measured the moment against everything they believed was fixed and immovable. Patton measured it against the work already in the folder, against the fuel already calculated, against the routes already mapped, against the divisions already briefed on a contingency that nobody else knew existed. He said 48 hours because he had already done the work. The laughter was aimed at a man they thought was claiming something he had not yet started. They were wrong by 3 days. That is what separated George Patton from the room that laughed. Not the revolvers, not the speeches, not the mythology that surrounded him like a permanent weather system. The folders, the contingency plans, the obsessive preparation undertaken in advance of any visible crisis, driven by the absolute certainty that the moment would come, that it always comes, and that when it comes, the only currency that purchases anything real is the work done before anyone knew the moment was approaching. He did not respond to the laughter with words. He responded with movement. Armor rolling north through snow. Supply trucks navigating frozen roads in darkness. Infantrymen who were cold and exhausted and followed the orders anyway because Third Army had given them a general worth following into the impossible. And 7 days later, in a town called Bastogne, surrounded by the debris of a siege that did not hold, the response was complete.